India is non-Western. India is not anti-Western. My diplomats are unsafe going to the embassy. Did I speak about it with Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken? Yes, I did.
And?
No.
G20 and elsewhere, we hear that India is looking for a change in international architecture or in the way world politics works and world institutions. I've also heard India described as a reformist rather than as a revisionist power. It seeks real change in the status quo, but not necessarily in the way that perhaps some of our colleagues and friends in Russia and China might do. What is it that India is looking for in change in the world situation, and how does that affect, do you think, India's vision of where we're all going?
Let me put it to you this way, that the world as we live it today is largely a Western construct. Now, if you looked at the world architecture, to use your words, there's been obviously enormous change in the last 8 years. If one looked at the major economies of the 1940s and 50s, they are very different from the major economies today, and nothing illustrates it more than the G20 itself. The list of the G20 will tell you is the easiest way of actually getting a sense of the changes in the world. Now, for India, when we confront a largely Western created architecture, obviously we would like to encourage and facilitate and induce and pressurize changes which are badly needed. But it is done to add a non-Western layer and a input. So I make this very important distinction where India is concerned. India is non-Western. India is not anti-Western. So when we speak about, and I'll give you an example which we discussed even at the G20. It's very clear today that if we are serious about climate action, if you are looking to sustain, to ensure that sustainable development goals are well resourced, then somewhere we have to find the financial muscle for that. Now, for us too, it is the international financial institutions, the bank, the World Bank and the fund, which will be at the core of that effort. So a lot of what we are seeking to do is to improve and I would say refresh institutions, make them more fit for purpose. And that even applies to the United Nations. We do believe today that a United Nations where the most populous country is not in the Security Council, when the fifth largest economy is not there, when a continent of 50 plus countries is not there, that United Nations obviously lacks credibility and to a large degree effectiveness as well. So the whole, when we approach the world, it's not with a sort of pull down the pillars kind of approach. It is very much what can we do to make it better, fitter, efficient, purposeful. That's the kind of mindset we bring to bear.
We in the United States have had the experience not only of lectures from India, but lectures from Canada. And, I think...
they look at you as the global South.
Yeah. It's one of the more interesting relationships. And I think Dean Acheson once wrote an essay about Canadian criticisms of the United States, and he titled it "Stern Daughter of the Voice of God." But certainly the Canadian Prime Minister has made some serious charges recently. But I also see that from press reports that you have met while you're in Washington with National Security Advisor Sullivan, with our Secretary of State, Blinken, and that this subject has come up. Can you give us any information about how this is or isn't affecting U.S.-India relations, where this whole matter stands now from your perspective?
Okay. Now, so let me start with Canada. Yes, the Canadian Prime Minister made some allegations, initially privately and then publicly. And our response to him, both in private and public, were that what he was alleging was not consistent with our policy, and that if his government had anything relevant and specific they would like us to look into, we were open to looking at it. Now, that's where that conversation is at this point of time. But to understand that conversation, you have to also appreciate that this has been an issue of great friction for many years with Canada, in fact going back to the 1980s. Then it became dormant, but in the last few years it has come back very much into play because of what we consider to be a very permissive Canadian attitude towards terrorists, extremists, people who openly advocate violence. And they have been given operating space in Canada because of the compulsions of Canadian politics. I don't think most Americans, for Americans, perhaps Canada looks very different. But it depends, from where the interest, where the shoe pinches. For us, it has certainly been a country where organized crime from India, mixed with trafficking in people, mixed with secessionism, violence, terrorism. It's a very toxic combination of issues and people who have found operating space there. So a lot of our tensions with Canada, which well preceded what Mr. Trudeau said, actually come out of that. And today I'm actually in a situation where my diplomats are unsafe going to the embassy or to the consulates.
In Canada?
In Canada. They are publicly intimidated. And that has actually compelled me to temporarily suspend even visa operations in Canada. So as I said, often countries look very different depending on how you see them and what your interests are. But I have this problem in Canada. And so your question, did I speak about it with Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken? Yes, I did.
And?
No. Let's put it this way. They obviously shared, U.S. views and assessments on this whole situation, and I explained to them at some length. What I gave you was a summary of the concerns which I had. So I think hopefully we both came out of those meetings better informed.